What does it take to bring down the most feared crime boss in the city? Not a bullet, not a rival army. Sometimes all it takes is a bowl of beef stew, made by the one person in his entire mansion that nobody ever bothered to notice. For 18 months, this man had been wasting away, starving himself to death, not from illness, but from fear so deep it had swallowed his entire life. 6 trained chefs had come and gone. Not one of them could get him to take a single bite. And then a plus-size maid from a small town walked through the service entrance with nothing but a duffel bag and her grandmother's recipes. Stick around, because what happens in this mansion is something none of us saw coming. The Navarro mansion sat on the edge of the city like a fortress that had somewhere along the way stopped pretending to be a home. 34 rooms, 11 fireplaces, and a kitchen that had seen 6 different head chefs come and go in the last 18 months. Each one had arrived with credentials, reputations, crates of imported ingredients, and the quiet confidence of someone who had cooked for the powerful. And each one had left with their pride shredded and their paycheck cashed quietly through a third party so that nobody on the outside would ever know they'd worked here. The reason they all failed stood 6'2" and weighed barely 150 pounds on a good morning. Gabriel Navarro, 53 years old, head of the most powerful crime family in the region, was starving himself to death. Not by choice, not by illness exactly, by fear. A fear so complete, so consuming, that the simple act of lifting a fork had become the most dangerous thing he could imagine doing. 18 months earlier, Gabriel had sat down to dinner at his favorite restaurant. He'd taken 4 bites. By the time his driver pulled the car around, his vision was doubling. By the time they reached the hospital, his heart had stopped twice. The doctors called it a miraculous recovery. His men called it a message. They never found out exactly who had ordered it. In Gabriel's world, there were too many people with too many reasons. And that cold, bottomless realization had done something the poison itself hadn't quite managed. It had taken away his appetite, not just for food, for trust. He had tried in the beginning. He'd hired a food taster, an elderly man who would eat first, wait 20 minutes, and give him the nod. And still, Gabriel couldn't eat. He'd sit watching the steam rise, and his throat would close like a fist, and his hands would shake, and he'd push the plate away and ask for one of the medical protein shakes his doctor prescribed. The shakes were safe because he mixed them himself from sealed packages. They tasted like chalk and disappointment, but they kept him alive. Barely. His doctor visited every 2 weeks with the same increasingly alarmed verdict: malnourished, deteriorating muscle, compromised immune system. "You are approaching a threshold, Gabriel," the doctor had said at the last visit. "If something does not change, something will change." Gabriel had said, "Leave." And the doctor left, because that was what everyone did when Gabriel spoke in that tone. He was disappearing, and he knew it. His men knew it. And the man who knew it best of all, who watched it with the most careful and calculating attention, was Deegan Butler. Deegan was 41, broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed, with a face that photographed well and eyes that didn't quite match the smile above them. He'd been Gabriel's underboss for 6 years, patient, methodical, deeply, quietly ambitious. He had never once moved against Gabriel directly. He'd never needed to. He simply waited, positioned himself, and watched the clock with the serene certainty of a man who had already decided how this story ended. Over 18 months, Deegan had quietly restructured key relationships, placed his own people, handled negotiations and collections in Gabriel's name, and handled them the way he wanted, not the way Gabriel would have. The chefs had even been Deegan's idea, not out of concern for Gabriel's health, but because a visibly wasting boss was a liability, and because each failed culinary experiment gave Deegan a reason to be present, to be seen as the man keeping things running while Gabriel faded. Every failed meal meant Gabriel stayed weak, and a weak Gabriel meant the empire Deegan had spent 6 years orbiting would eventually, inevitably, fall into his hands. This was what Deegan was thinking on the morning Bridget Collins arrived, hauling a second-hand duffel bag and a rolling cart of cleaning supplies up the service entrance steps in a February drizzle. She was 27, from a small town, the second oldest of 5 siblings raised by a grandmother who had believed with absolute conviction that good food was the first language of love. Bridget had learned to cook before she learned to drive. She'd spent her teenage years feeding her younger siblings, stretching ingredients and patience across the kind of poverty that doesn't make you bitter if you were lucky enough to be raised by someone who taught you to make something out of nothing and find joy in the doing. She wasn't a trained chef. No certificates, no stars. What she had was a deep, intuitive understanding of food as comfort, as the simplest and most honest form of care one person could offer another. She was also plus size, in a body she carried with the matter-of-fact ease of someone who had long ago decided that other people's opinions about her shape were not her problem to manage. She moved efficiently, spoke directly, and had a laugh that arrived without warning and filled whatever room it entered. What the job listing had not mentioned was that the man whose house she'd be cleaning had not eaten a real meal in a year and a half, and was being slowly consumed from the inside out by a terror he couldn't name to anyone without losing the only thing he had left, which was the appearance of control. The head of household, Mrs. Hargrove, met her at the door. A silver-haired woman of 62 who carried herself with the exhaustion of someone who had been competent for so long that competence had stopped bringing her any satisfaction. She laid out the rules. East wing, common areas, the kitchen, but only after the chef's hours were done. Don't enter the 3rd floor. Don't speak to Mr. Navarro unless spoken to. Do you have questions? Mrs. Hargrove asked. Bridget looked around at the immaculate stone floors, the clinical, sterile smell of a space scrubbed of all traces of actual living. Just one, she said. Which way to the supply closet? Mrs. Hargrove almost smiled. Bridget worked 4 days before she saw Gabriel for the first time. She'd heard him, of course. The household orbited his rhythms the way planets orbit a star, and she'd seen the packages in the pantry, 12 of them neatly stacked. Medical nutrition supplements, the kind designed to keep hospitalized patients alive when they couldn't eat solid food. She'd stood looking at them for a long moment. Then she'd gone back to mopping and said nothing. She finally saw him on the 4th evening. He came around a corner holding a glass of water and stopped when he saw her. Her first thought was that she hadn't expected him to look like this. She'd dusted photographs of a commanding figure surrounded by men who looked at him the way soldiers look at generals. The bone structure was still there, the jaw, the brow. But everything else had been carved away. His cheekbones pushed against his skin. His hands around the glass were the hands of a much older man. His eyes were sharp and alert in the way that only happens when a body has been running on anxiety so long that rest has become foreign. "You're new," he said, not unfriendly. "Yes, sir. Bridget Collins. I started Monday." He looked at the section of floor she'd been working on. "The east corridor hasn't been mopped properly in 3 weeks. Nobody does the baseboards." "I did the baseboards," she said. Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile, but smaller and more careful than that. "I can see that," he said, and walked on. But she kept thinking about those packages in the pantry. The 6th chef, Marco, lasted 9 days. He was technically brilliant, his knife work immaculate, everything he produced looking like a magazine photograph. And every night he carried the full plate back untouched. "He never eats," Marco told her one evening, his voice fraying. "He looks at it. He picks up the fork, holds it for 4 minutes, and asks me to take it away. He's starving. You can see it on his face, and he's thanking me for a meal he won't let himself touch." "He's afraid," Bridget said. "And a perfect plate doesn't help with fear. If anything, it probably looks like exactly the kind of thing someone would go to elaborate lengths to make perfect before putting something terrible in it." Marco stared at her. "I have a family," he said. "I cannot keep doing this." He gave notice the next morning. That evening, Bridget sat in her small staff room and thought about her grandmother's kitchen. The yellow walls, the old stove with the stubborn burner, the way her grandmother would taste from the spoon and add a pinch of something and taste again, not because she was following a recipe, but because she was listening to the food. Food isn't about technique, baby, her grandmother had said once. Anybody can learn technique. Food is about intention. People can taste intention. They always could. Bridget wasn't planning anything. She was cleaning staff. But 3 days later, a storm rolled in and the power flickered, and she was in the kitchen doing her end-of-day cleanup when she opened the refrigerator. Good beef, carrots, celery, potatoes, garlic, onions, herbs, all of it stocked and waiting, ordered for a chef who was no longer coming. She closed the door. She stood there a very long time. Then she opened it again. She told herself she was just using ingredients that would otherwise go to waste. She was absolutely thinking about the man on the 3rd floor. She seared the beef without moving it, the way her grandmother had taught her, until the crust formed and released on its own. She built the base slowly: onion, carrot, celery, garlic. She nestled the beef back in, lowered the flame, and let time do the rest. She boiled potatoes until tender and whipped them with more butter than was strictly necessary, and garlic roasted soft as cream. This wasn't a dish about restraint. It was a dish about warmth. The kitchen filled with a smell that had nothing clinical or constructed about it. Just the ancient, honest smell of food given time to become itself. And then she heard footsteps. Slow ones. The footsteps of someone drawn somewhere without fully deciding to go. She didn't turn around. She ladled the stew into a bowl, set a clean spoon against the rim, and turned. Gabriel stood in the doorway of his own kitchen in a dark sweater and socked feet, his hair uncombed, his face carrying the stripped-down expression of a man woken by a smell he hadn't allowed himself to follow in a very long time. "What is that?" he said. Not quite a question. "Beef stew. My grandmother's recipe. There's nothing fancy about it. It's just food." He looked at it. Something in his face was working very hard at staying neutral. "It smells," he started. "I know," she said. A long silence. The storm. The simmering pot. "Are you going to stand there and stare at it?" she said carefully. "Or are you going to come in?" He held her gaze, and she held his, without flinching, without performing the careful deference everyone else aimed at him like a shield. And something in that stillness, in her complete lack of fear or agenda, made him take one slow step into the kitchen. "I know what happened to you," she said quietly, not cruelly. "I've heard enough, and I'm not going to tell you it's safe. I'm just going to tell you that I made this myself. No one touched it but me. And I'm going to eat some right now, in front of you, from the same pot with the same ladle. And then whatever you decide is your decision." She took a bowl, ladled the stew, and ate. Not as a performance. The way she always ate, with the quiet attention of someone who genuinely loves food. Gabriel watched her for 3 full minutes. Then, without speaking, he picked up the spoon she'd set down. His hand was not entirely steady. "It's all right," she said, not looking at him. "Take your time." The spoon hovered for what felt like a very long time. And then Gabriel Navarro, a man who had survived 3 assassination attempts and built an empire from nothing, dipped his spoon into the broth and lifted it to his lips. The moment the flavor hit him, something happened in his face that he had no energy left to control. His eyes closed, just for a second. When he opened them, Bridget was looking at the pot, giving him that moment in the only way she could think to offer it. He took another spoonful, and another. And for the first time in 18 months, Gabriel Navarro ate a real meal. When he set the spoon down, the bowl was nearly empty. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" he asked. "My grandmother. She believed that if you fed people right, they'd be okay. Most of the time, she was right." He stood, steadier than he'd looked coming in. "Good night, Miss Collins. Don't tell anyone about this." "I clean floors," she said. "I don't have conversations." He didn't turn around, but she heard something in the pause that might, from a different man in a different life, have been gratitude. Then he was gone. What she didn't know was that 20 feet away, Deegan Butler had been watching the corridor camera feed, had seen Gabriel walk to the kitchen and stay for 40 minutes, and was already calculating what it meant. The next morning, Gabriel asked her to report to the kitchen at 7, not to clean it. He sat at the island, which told her immediately this was serious. "How much do you know about why the chefs have been failing?" he asked. "Enough. The restaurant, the hospital. Who told you?" "Nobody, directly. People talk around cleaning staff the way they talk around furniture. I'm not going to use what I know against you. I have a job, a paycheck, and a room with a decent mattress. That's what I came here for." He looked at her steadily. "Can you cook something now? Something simple? While I watch." She understood exactly what he was asking and what he was not. He didn't want a meal. He wanted to watch the process, to see the chain of custody from raw ingredient to finished plate with his own eyes. Because the thing that had broken in him wasn't his appetite, it was his ability to trust the gap between the kitchen and the plate. She made scrambled eggs, low and slow, stirring constantly the way her grandmother insisted. She talked while she cooked, about the storm, about how her youngest brother had once convinced her eggs needed hot sauce on principle. Gabriel watched every single movement her hands made. She plated the eggs, took a portion for herself first, and ate. Then he picked up the fork, and he ate. It wasn't the revelation of the night before. It was smaller, quieter, but in some ways more significant. Because the night before, hunger had overridden fear. This morning, the fear was still there, and he ate anyway. That was a choice. "Same time tomorrow," he said, and left. By the third morning, the routine had solidified. By the fifth, Gabriel was eating more than he was leaving. By the end of the second week, something had changed in the texture of the whole household, a subtle shift everyone felt but no one named. Everyone except Deegan Butler, who named it very precisely to himself and did not like the name at all. He pulled Bridget's file, unremarkable on the surface, which somehow bothered him more than anything suspicious would have. He went to find her, choosing his timing deliberately, and came around the corner all warmth and ease. "Miss Collins, what you've been doing for Mr. Navarro is remarkable. If you ever need anything, resources, support of any kind, my door is open." "That's very kind of you," she said, with a clear-eyed directness that surprised him. "I'll keep that in mind." She hadn't taken the offer. Worse, she hadn't reacted the way most people did, with flattered compliance. She'd just looked at him, measured, unimpressed. He filed that away. Bridget, meanwhile, had grown up around enough charm deployed as a tool to recognize it on contact. His eyes, while his mouth offered open doors, had been doing something else entirely, assessing, calculating. And the calculation was not about her welfare. She said nothing to Gabriel. She had no evidence. But she kept Dagan's face in her mind the way you keep an unfamiliar sound in your mind walking home at night. Not panicked, just aware. The morning sessions continued, and Gabriel began to linger, to talk. About a restaurant in another country he'd visited at 30. About his mother's Sunday gravy. About a summer at the shore when he was 12, which made Bridget laugh because her grandmother had taken her to the very same coast that same summer. "That's how you know someone really taught you something," he said once about her grandmother. "When they're still in the room, even when they're not." And she understood he was talking about more than cooking. Then everything shifted. Gabriel came in one morning with his jaw set. "There's going to be a sit-down next week, a formal meeting with the other families. I haven't attended one in 11 months. Dagan has been representing me." He stopped. "I need to be present, fully present. Not this." He gestured at himself. "I need to sit at a table with 7 other people and eat a full meal without falling apart. In 6 days." "All right," she said. "Then that's what we're going to do." She started that evening, setting the kitchen table for 2, cooking a full dinner, sitting across from him. The first time his hands weren't steady and he left a third of the plate. She didn't comment. The second evening, he left less. The third, she invited a trusted security man, Torres, to join them, and Gabriel ate in company for the first time in 18 months. The fourth evening, his attorney showed up and talked business through the whole meal, and Gabriel finished the entire plate without noticing. On the fifth evening, Dagan walked past the doorway and stopped. The table was set for 4. Gabriel sat at the head, leaning forward, engaged, his color better than it had been in over a year, eating a full plate with steady hands and clear eyes. 6 days ago, Deegan had estimated he had at least 4 more months before Gabriel's deterioration required formal action. What he was looking at now was not 4 months. What he was looking at was a man coming back. "Sit down," Gabriel said. Deegan sat. Bridget set a plate in front of him without ceremony. And underneath his pleasant smile, Deegan was very carefully thinking about his next move. A weakened Gabriel had been manageable. A Gabriel with an anchor, a person who had rebuilt his capacity for trust at the most fundamental level, was something else entirely. The woman was a problem. She needed to be removed from the equation. Cleanly, quietly, before the sit-down. But Gabriel had not missed a single thing that passed between them at that table. And his eyes, when Deegan wasn't looking, had gone somewhere very still and very cold. That night, after dinner, Gabriel stayed at the table. "How long have you known," he said, "that Deegan was a problem?" "I suspected something the morning he came to find me in the hall. He was too warm. Men like that aren't warm without a reason." "He's going to try to have you removed before the sit-down," Gabriel said. "He'll manufacture something. An agency issue. Something procedural that Mrs. Hargrove would have to act on." He looked at her directly. "Unless I move first. I can change your employment status tonight. Direct household staff, my payroll, my decision. That makes it significantly harder for him to touch you without coming to me directly, which he won't, because he doesn't want me looking at him closely right now." "Make the call," she said. He made the call. 11 minutes, and it was done. She was no longer an agency placement. She was direct Navarro household staff, her contract held by an entity reporting only to Gabriel. She'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross, and lying in bed that night, she decided she was comfortable having crossed it. The next morning, Deegan called the agency at 8:15 and learned Bridget was no longer their placement. He sat for 3 minutes without moving. Then he made a different call to a man named Reyes, who handled the kind of problems that didn't have official solutions, speaking in careful language that meant something quite different from the words themselves. What Deegan hadn't accounted for was Torres. Torres had one loyalty in his life, and it was absolute. 18 months earlier, during Gabriel's worst period, he had added an internal relay that captured signal traffic near the mansion because he'd decided without asking permission that his boss's safety required it. Torres heard all 4 minutes of Deegan's call. Then he went to find Gabriel and played him the recording. Gabriel listened without speaking. When it ended, his face had moved from uncertainty to confirmed knowledge. "Watch Reyes," he said. "If he comes within 2 blocks of this house, I want to know immediately. And Deegan comes to work tomorrow, same as always. We are not changing anything yet." He went straight to the kitchen and told Bridget everything, plainly. Because she'd once asked him to answer her straight, and he'd decided it went both directions. "And in the meantime," she said, "you don't go anywhere in this house alone. You don't eat or drink anything you haven't prepared yourself." "I am not going to let anything happen to you," he said. The sit-down was 4 days away. The house ran on its normal rhythms on the surface, Deegan's smile in perfect working order. But Bridget was watching him now with full attention. On the second day, she saw a man with a visitor pass who moved like someone told to move like he belonged there. She noted the pass number and went to Torres. There was no work scheduled that day. The man was located 20 minutes later in a section of the house directly adjacent to the staff quarters where Bridget's room was. He was escorted out. Deegan had a perfect alibi. That evening, Torres played Gabriel the footage. "Move the timeline," Gabriel said. "He doesn't wait for after the sit-down. He moves before. 2 people on Bridget every moment. She's not in a room I'm in personally." "I owe you an apology," Gabriel told her later. "You came here to clean floors. You didn't sign up for Deegan Butler." "Nobody signs up for Deegan Butler," she said. "He just shows up. And stop apologizing and tell me what you need me to do." She paused. "I want to rehearse the dinner. I want you eating it at this table, in company, under pressure, until it is not a performance anymore. Can you give me 3 evenings?" He stared at her, and then made a sound that was not quite laughter, but was unmistakably adjacent to it, the first in 18 months. 3 evenings. Fine. The rehearsal dinners became something more than she'd planned. Formal, multiple courses, the kind of meal a trained chef might produce, except hers carried the additional quality of being made by someone who genuinely wanted the person eating it to feel cared for. By the third evening, with 2 of his trusted captains talking across the table and Bridget moving between kitchen and dining room with practiced ease, Gabriel looked like the man in the photograph she'd dusted on her first week. He looked like himself. After the captains left that third night, he stayed. 6 weeks ago, my doctor told me I was approaching a threshold. I told him something would change to get him out of the room. I did not believe it. I believe it now. That's because of you. Nobody has treated me like a normal problem in a very long time. The sit-down was tomorrow, and at 9 that evening, Torres appeared in the study doorway. Reyes moved. He was picked up at the perimeter 20 minutes ago, armed. He had a photo. A pause. Of Miss Collins. The room went very still. Gabriel stood slowly, the way a man stands when he has made a decision, and the making of it has settled something into a cold and absolute quiet. Where is she now? Kitchen, 2 of mine with her. Bring Reyes inside, find Dagan, and Torres, tell her. She has a right to know. Dagan had miscalculated. He'd looked at Gabriel's recovery and seen a threat to neutralize, and in doing so, made the oldest mistake available to patient, ambitious men. He'd kept thinking about the target and stopped thinking about the man behind it. Gabriel had never stopped thinking. He just needed time to think clearly again. And Bridget, with her grandmother's recipes and her complete absence of performance, had given him that time. He went to the kitchen. Bridget stood at the counter, both hands pressed flat, her face composed in the way a person's face gets composed when they've processed something frightening and decided not to let it own them. "You're safe," he said. "Reyes is in custody. You are not alone for a single minute." He crossed the kitchen and for the first time put his hand over hers, brief, warm, deliberate, and she exhaled, finally, a full breath. "Same time tomorrow," she said. "Same time tomorrow," he said. The next morning, Dagan came down at 7:15, looking like a man who'd slept 8 hours. The kitchen was occupied. Gabriel sat at the island, actually sitting, at ease in his own space. Torres stood near the doorway, eyes moving. Bridget worked at the stove and did not give Dagan anything, not a flicker. Gabriel ate breakfast. The conversation was professional, focused on the sit-down. Gabriel asked precise questions and offered his own positions, with a clarity Dagan hadn't heard in over a year. Each one landed in Dagan's chest like a small, cold stone. What Dagan didn't know was that Torres had placed a listening device in his office 3 days earlier. Gabriel knew about the call Dagan had made that morning to a plant inside one of the rival families, a man named Ferretti, who was going to surface questions about Gabriel's fitness at the meeting. Gabriel and Torres had built a complete file, the transfers, the Reyes connection, everything. After the sit-down, the situation changes, Gabriel told Bridget. "Be careful in that room," she said, "and don't let him make you feel like you have something to prove, because you don't." The sit-down was held in a private hotel room, 9 men around the table. The first 40 minutes were procedural, and the room responded to Gabriel the way it always had, with the particular attention given to someone whose position is not in question. Dagan recalibrated his timing. The financial review began. The South Side question came up naturally, and Ferretti cleared his throat. "There's a concern relating to the management of the Navarro South Corridor over the past year. Inconsistencies that suggest the organization may have been operating without adequate central oversight." The room shifted. This was the moment. "Which inconsistencies?" Gabriel said. Ferretti named 3 line items, numbers Dagan had moved carefully over 11 months. "I'm familiar with all 3, Gabriel said. "They were authorized specifically because of a restructuring I initiated last spring, He opened a folder. His attorney slid 3 sheets across the table. The supporting documentation. Dagan stared at the sheets. He had never seen those documents before. He'd moved those numbers in a way he was certain left no trail connecting them to Gabriel, because Gabriel hadn't authorized them. The documentation didn't exist in any filing system he had access to, which meant someone had created it, working backward from his own movements, to build a paper trail that looked legitimate. His face showed nothing. He sat with it for about 4 seconds. Then he made his decision. He was not going to be handled quietly. "Gabriel," he said, level, almost collegial, "I think we need to have a different conversation. There are people in this room who have been uncertain about the stability of Navarro leadership over the past year and a half. The honest thing is to acknowledge it." "I agree," Gabriel said. Dagan blinked. "Let's be honest. Torres." The door opened. Torres came in, and behind him the attorney with a far thicker file. Torres set a small recording device on the table. "Over the past 7 months," Gabriel said, "my head of security has documented 31 irregular transfers from Navarro accounts to 3 shell entities, approximately $4.2 million. The transfers correlate precisely with periods when my availability was limited and Dagan was managing accounts on my behalf. I have the complete documentation, the account tracing, records of Dagan's communications with a contractor named Reyes, who was taken into custody last night in possession of a photograph of a member of my household staff." He looked at Dagan. "You asked for honesty. That's what I have." The room was frozen. "You built a very patient architecture, Dagan," Gabriel said quietly. 7 months before I took my first real look. 4 more to put it all together. You almost had enough time." For a moment, Dagan's composure cracked. "The maid," he said flat. "The fat maid. That's what changed the timeline." Gabriel's expression went somewhere cold and absolute. "Take him out." Dagan stood without being touched, because he was still, to the end, a man who chose how he moved. At the door, he looked back at the faces around the table and saw something worse than hatred. The removal of consideration. The dismissal that in this world was more final than almost anything. He left without speaking. Gabriel was home by 1:58. He'd said 2. He was, as he had always been before, a man who was where he said he would be when he said he'd be there. Bridget was in the kitchen. The table was set for 2. "It's done," she said. "It's done," he said. He sat. She brought 2 plates. Braised chicken, roasted carrots, herbed potatoes. He picked up his fork without hesitation, without the old pause, without any of the internal negotiation that had once made eating feel like combat. He just ate. He said something when they were taking him out. She said evenly. "The fat maid." Gabriel set his fork down and looked at her, his face entirely unguarded. He meant it as an insult. He was identifying the thing that broke his plan. He wasn't wrong about what it was. He was only wrong about the word. You were the thing that changed the timeline. Not my lawyers, not Torres. You. Because you walked into this house and treated the most important problem like a normal one, and you made me functional again. And a functional me was the only thing standing between Dagan Butler and everything I spent 30 years building. "I know what I did," she said. "I just made food for a man who needed to eat." "Yes," he said, "and you have no idea how much that was." In the weeks that followed, the empire steadied. Gabriel worked 18-hour days, ate every meal, and on the nights he came home late, he'd find something in the refrigerator with a note in Bridget's handwriting, telling him what it was and how long to heat it. He heated the food. He ate it. Every time, his doctor came for a scheduled visit and stopped in the doorway, staring. The numbers had reversed in every direction that mattered. "What happened?" the doctor asked. "I started eating," Gabriel said. "I've been telling you to eat for 18 months. "None of it was what I needed," Gabriel said. "Someone who didn't treat it like a medical problem. Someone who treated it like dinner." He formalized Bridget's role, no longer cleaning staff, but the person who ran the kitchen, and, by extension, made the place a home people wanted to be in instead of a fortress they were assigned to. She accepted, on one condition. I want to keep doing the East Corridor baseboards. Mrs. Hargrove's rotation still doesn't do them properly. And Gabriel laughed, a real full laugh, the kind that had been absent from that kitchen for far too long. On a Friday, he did something nobody expected. He called a household dinner, 12 people, all the senior staff and security, no operational purpose. Bridget made roasted chicken, braised greens, 2 kinds of bread because she'd learned a household this size was always divided on the question, and her grandmother's apple cake. When she came through the door with the first dishes, Gabriel stood up. Not because of the food, because she came through the door, and standing was simply what his body did. The dinner was loud, the way the mansion hadn't been in a very long time. After dessert, Gabriel tapped his glass. This past year and a half has been the most difficult period of my life. The people in this room lived through it with me, and some of you stayed when you had every reason to go. I won't forget it. He looked down the table. There's a person here who has no reason to be here except that she showed up and did what she thought was right and didn't stop. Bridget Collins came to this house to clean floors. I am here and functioning and at this table tonight because of what she did and how she did it. He lifted his glass. Bridget, at the far end where she'd seated herself because that was where she felt she belonged, lifted her own. Your grandmother would have done the same thing, she said, returning the credit to something larger than herself. My mother would have loved you, Gabriel said quietly, just for her, across the length of the table. Later, in the quiet kitchen after everyone had gone, he found her doing what she always did, the closing of a kitchen as satisfying to her as the opening of one. Say the thing you're not saying, she told him. He looked at her a long moment. I don't want you here because it's your job. I want you here because you want to be here. And I need you to know your position isn't contingent on it. None of it moves based on this conversation. Do you think I didn't already know that? I've been watching you be a decent man in difficult circumstances. I know what you are. A pause. I'm here because I want to be here. I made that decision a while ago. I just wasn't going to say it first. He took a step toward her, and she didn't step back. He put his hand over hers, and this time it wasn't brief, and it wasn't comfort offered in a crisis. It was something that had been building for weeks, from a pot of stew on a stormy night. Same time tomorrow, she said. The smile that had been approaching for 6 weeks finally arrived, complete, real, his. Same time tomorrow, he said. So here's what stays with me about this whole story. We tend to think power looks like force, like armies and money and fear. But the most powerful thing in this entire tale was a bowl of stew made by a woman the world had trained itself not to see. 6 brilliant chefs, with all their technique and credentials, couldn't do what Bridget did because they were solving the wrong problem. They thought it was about the food. It was never about the food. It was about trust. And you can't plate trust. You can't garnish it. You can only build it, one honest act at a time, the way her grandmother taught her, by feeding a hungry person and not making a production of it. And there's something worth sitting with in the way Deegan lost. He was patient, brilliant, methodical, and he had every advantage. But he made the one mistake that brings down men like him every single time. He underestimated the person nobody else was looking at. He saw a maid. A body to dismiss with a cruel word. He never once imagined that the quiet woman cooking eggs was the thing that would unravel 6 years of careful scheming. Because the world is full of people we walk past without a second glance. People carrying more strength, more decency, more quiet power than we'd ever guess. Bridget was the proof. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Never measure a person's worth by how much space the world gives them. Measure it by what they choose to do when nobody's watching. If Bridget's quiet strength and that long, satisfying takedown of Deegan hit the spot for you, then do me a favor and smash that like button right now. It honestly helps more than you know. Share this story with someone who needs the reminder that the smallest, kindest acts can change everything. and that you should never underestimate the person nobody bothered to notice. And if you want more stories exactly like this one, full of slow-burn justice, warmth, and characters who turn out to be so much more than they appear, make sure you hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's coming next. And drop a comment down below and tell me, what was your favorite moment? Was it the first bowl of stew on the stormy night? The rehearsal dinners? The moment everything came crashing down on Deegan at that table? And tell me where you're watching from. I genuinely want to see how far this story travels. I read every single comment, and the best ones just might shape the next story I tell. So don't be shy. Let's hear it.